Thank you. Thank you for your welcome, for the organizers of this event, for their invitation, and very warm greeting to each of you who are joining us in this beautiful event. From the first hour of his pontificate, Pope Francis has set into motion a process of the reform of the structures of the church, to begin by the Roman Curia in his primate ministry. Their pastoral theological reference is synodality, a component of being and of task or work of the church. And we see the bishop conferences, and whether national or continental conferences, that certainly after the Roman Curia may have a different structuring toward even more synodal as organs for the expression of the exercise of bishop collegiality. The bishop conferences are an ecclesial subject, relatively new. The same national state that were born with the consolidation of the democratic ideals of the French Revolution. The bishop conferences were born or were created as the free initiative of the bishop to face the new pastoral challenges derived by the arising of new civil circumscriptions. They quickly gained proportion and importance, contributing to a larger dynamism of ecclesial synodality in through decadence from the end of the first millennium. In Latin American Caribbean, the bishop conferences had a preponderant role, particularly in the process of reception of the Second Vatican Council and the thesis of Ecclesial as Medellin. Although in the midst of tensions and internal conflicts in the organs of the Roman Curia, however, with the process of the ecclesial evolution in relation to the renewal of the Second Vatican Council, establishing in the church the 3 decades that preceded the actual pontificate, the bishop conferences went through a relevance ecclesiology even lower and lower, smaller. In addition of having gone through a profound change in the profile of its members, with the occasion of the celebration of the 25 years of the Second Vatican Council on the Bishop of Synod for Bishops, they had their theological statute question. In spite of the reactions, and nothing led for the change of its statute. And from that legal frame established in the apostolic letter, Apostolus Suis, see the spirit of ecclesiology of the Second Vatican to the ecclesial synodality and bishop. It is to put the bishop collegiality at the heart of the exercise of the sensus fidelium of the entire people of God. For Ranner, the particular council, provincial, regional, that arose spontaneously in history in order to the pastoral demand of the churches, constitute the prehistory, the ancient history of the bishop conferences in its remote foundation. In other words, there is an analogy amongst particular councils and bishop conferences born in a century before they were formally instituted by Pius X. The Pope himself does not reference such analogy, but he refers to them as partial substitution of the particular councils. Unfortunately, the fear of the new and centralism of the Roman Curia, little by little will make the national bishop conference to lose their autonomy. Those that autonomy that saw them how they were created, as well as the decisions that were made. So this did not happen in relation to the particular councils. In having these guidelines in perspective, the first general conference of the General Bishop Conference in Latin America and the Caribbean, held in Rio de Janeiro in 1955, among others. The general conferences can only be held when the apostolic sede decides to call upon it. The agenda is defined by the Holy See. A pontifical delegate will be one of the presiding the conference. Members of the Roman Curia will be members of the conference with right to an intervention and sessions and to vote. The conclusions of the assembly must be approved by Rome. In this format, the conference in Medellin, Puebla, Santo Domingo, and still Aparecida were held. So one might think that the renewal of the Second Vatican Council and consequently the rescue of synodality would help overcome the Roman centralization. On the contrary, even the post-council period of centralization does not cease to increase. For example, before the celebration of the sign-up of bishops in 1985, called to celebrate the 25 years of its opening, then the prefect of the congregations for the teachings in the faith contributed to the bishop conferences to a pragmatic and functional role. Bishop conferences do not have a theological base, are not part of the essential structure of the church as Christ wanted it. They only have a practical function. No bishop conference have, as such, a magisterial mission. Their documents do not have a specific value except for the value of consensus that is attributed by each bishop. Such affirmation does not find support in council ecclesiology. Before that, is actually founded in an ecclesiology that largely existing in the church during the second millennium, that gives to understand that there is a universal church that precedes and it makes present the local churches in which the Pope is the representative. The dioceses are just parcels of this universal church, and consequently bishops are collaborators of the Pope, who in turn is the bishop of bishops. As we can see in such perception of the church, every intermediate instance has no significance among the Church of Rome and the local churches. The ecclesiology of the Second Vatican overcame this perception. For Karl Rahner, the greatest change of the council was to state that the Catholic Church is present in every local church in communion with the other churches. Consequently, as stated by Walter Casper, there are no church nor before or interior or exterior to the local churches. For the Second Vatican Council, the diocese is a portion of the people of God, no part, but a portion containing the entirety. In it, the entire church, since every local church is part of the totality of the entirety of the mystery of salvation, even though it is not the universal of the entire church. Given that none of them exhausts this mystery, for Walter Casper, as supposed universal church is preceded and makes present the local churches as is an ecclesiological fiction. The church, one, as stated by J.M.D. Tiller, is the church of churches, joining autonomy and communion with the other churches presided by the bishop of the Church of Rome. Consequently, Episcopal collegiality, it is not at the margins of the ecclesial synodality. On one side, collegiality does not happen in a vertical direction in relation with the bishop, the college of bishops as the pope. The bishop presiding a local church from which he is always a member to, and on the other hand, he needs to exercise his ministry in a synodal way with the entire people of God that constitute his church. On the other hand, his church, given that the church is the church of churches, it puts the bishop at the heart of its one and only college, presided by the bishop of the Church of Rome in demand and by the request of the other churches in synodality. In other words, it is the communion of the bishop with his people, of his church with the rest of the local churches that happens in ecclesial synodality. To eclipse the sensus fidelium, it means to operate or to create a rupture between ecclesial synodality and episcopal collegiality. In other words, it is to conceive the college as a group of people who had the power over the church and not in the church, as bishops, as if the bishops were not also members of the church that they preside and members of a college that binds them to the request of the churches as a whole. Therefore, the councils, synods, and assemblies of the Episcopal conferences are realizations or acts, concrete actions of being a synodal church that is linked or bind to the College of the Bishops. In reality, distance or the rupture between ecclesial synodality and episcopal collegiality in the history of the church was given concretely when the sacramental sense was of the bishop or ordainment was lost, as attested or shown by the canon law in 1917. The ordainment went from being conceived as a episcopal consecration, meaning reducing the transmission by grace, to the sacra potestas among those who confer and that who receives it without the assembly of the church, the local church, having any act or any function. Sometimes not even the local church exists when someone is ordained as bishop, not to preside a church, but to legitimize an episcopate of the functional dignity, or even to confer value in the exercise of such bureaucratic function. With that, the reciprocal union between the bishop and his church is symbolized in the with the bishop ring is weakened. On the Code of the Canon Law of 1983, in spite of the new ecclesiology of the Second Vatican, it continues to be distant from the ecclesiological tradition, whose central concept in relation to episcopal collegiality is the communio ecclesiarum. That is due to the fact that the council did not explain enough the collaboration between Collegium Episcoporum and Communio Ecclesiarum. The Lumen Gentium in number 22 states, as someone who turns as a member of the college, the new member, part of the episcopal body, is constituted in virtue of the sacramental consecration and through hierarchical communion with the head and with the members of the respective college. However, it silenced that the new bishop turns to be a member of the college, not by appointment of the episcopal appointment of the Pope, but to be by the fact of being ordained for a local church. Therefore, that Collegium Episcoporum, it is inserted at the heart of Communio Ecclesiarum theologically to reduce the role of the episcopal conferences to a pragmatic and functional objective. It lacks theological foundations. It is not that the bishop conferences do not have a theological statute. It is the negation of the statute that lacks a theological foundation. First, because this ecclesiology does not support the concept of unity of the church that justifies a central government and the imposition of a uniformity of teaching or doctrine and of discipline over all the local churches. This will entail or will commit the legitimate diversity of the churches as a church of churches. Secondly, to reduce the role of the episcopate bishop conferences to a pragmatic, objective, and functional goal. It lacks the foundation because it is supported by such autonomy of the diocesan bishop that is isolated from the college, and with that it isolates his church from the commune with the rest of the churches. A bishop that is isolated from the college and isolates his church from the rest of the churches, he is situated outside of the church. The unity of the church of Rome goes through the unity of the rest of the churches. With extreme prudence, the Second Vatican Council does not use the terms collegiality but college of bishops. Understood by this as the series or group of the body of bishops that constitute with the Roman Pontifice, the head, a hierarchical communion, stable and indivisible. It is needed, however, to have present that the Council understands by communion mainly when we talk about the bishop conferences. One could think, for example, as the action of the entire college of bishops or nothing. And the Second Vatican Council on Lumen Gentium 22, it talks about two collegial strictly collegial actions. One when it's exercised in a solemn way in the plenary council and outside, and another outside of it, always with the consensus, free consensus of the successor of Peter. In the second case, also with the collegial action, we see, according to the council, see two ways. One with the head and the of the college that inviting a collegial action, and the other one when really accepting the collegial action of the bishops between local churches of a region. In these cases, it is about Lumen Gentium 23. It states of partial ways of collegiality, which the council names or denominates a collegial effect, collegial union, or the request of all or group of all the churches. The partial ways, however, are not without the true exercise of collegiality, because they are fruit of the strictly collegial act, given that they are founded in the college. It is about this theological foundation that the Second Vatican Council in Christus Dominus number 38 approves and suggests the national bishop conferences, not, however, resting authority and reserving a pure and an objective, merely pragmatic and functional. They, in some way, put into question the authority of the primate, the head of the college, and they nor commit to the autonomy of the diocesan bishop leading the local church. On one hand, the Ius Divinum, the Petrine ministry, coexists in the church with all the members of the episcopate, and on the other, the diocesan bishop does not, despite the Ius Divinum, since the church is the church of churches. With that, the intermediate instances among the local churches and the Church of Rome, as are the bishop conferences, allowed to overcome a general universalism as very narrow diocesans and make the local church among the churches, including the Church of Rome, preside the communion of churches. Thank you very much.